All right, what's up? Welcome to the mystery religion known as Dialectical Materialism. And you might think, how could this man be so insane, so foolish? Materialism is not religious. It's purely scientific. Purely scientific. Indeed, that is what Marxism claimed to be as it progressed from the earlier revolutionary movements of the time of the French Revolution, and even before that, from the figures of Saint-Simon, Saint-Just, and Buonarroti, and Weishaupt. So we'll be going into some history here, going back to some of the revolutionary figures that precede Marx, even back to the Renaissance period, the magic of the Renaissance period, and some of the Hermeticists that precede and influence Marx. And you say, wait a minute, how could Hermeticists influence Karl Marx? Because Marx was an atheist. It's just not possible. Right, but you see the Hermeticists influence one of the most important influences on Marx, and that's Hegel. So we're going to be talking about some of Hegel's process philosophy, the mystical religion of process, the worship of dialectical process itself. And the worship of dialectical process, or the attributing to dialectical process of theological and religious intentionality and attributes, is not new to Hegel or the Hermeticists of that period prior to Hegel and the secret societies that people in the Prussian aristocracy were members of. This also spills over into ancient philosophy, where the original ideas of Marxism find their roots, particularly in the famous figures of the pre-socratics and Plato. Now, I've covered the predecessors to Marxism and socialism and Platonism many, many times, so we're not going to focus on Plato. We're going to focus on pre-Socratic ideology, particularly the figure of Heraclitus. And the reason that we want to talk about Heraclitus is that he has a specific presupposition about flux. All reality is essentially flux for Heraclitus. And if you don't know, I did teach a course going through the history of Western philosophy, and we began with the pre-Socratics, and that's a 30-plus hour course, which you can purchase right there if you're interested, from Richard Grove's Autonomy Agora Marketplace, together with the Q&As and all of that. It comes to close to 40 hours of information. But we begin the talk with how Western philosophy is really rooted in the notion of dialectics. And it goes back older. It's prior to what we call Western philosophy, usually beginning with the Greeks, because you can go back to ancient Aryan Hindu philosophy, you can go back to ancient Babylonian philosophy, you can go back to ancient Egyptian philosophy. They had very similar approaches, usually the assumptions of total monism or total dualism. That's most world religions and ancient religions, especially Far Eastern religions. They typically fall over into either being monistic or dualistic. And that's true for the irreligious pre-Socratic philosophers. While the pre-Socratics, you could say that they were a kind of proto-atheist, they still attributed magical powers to matter. Matter does things that God could do. Matter comes to be out of nothing, or has always eternally existed, and so it has a kind of eternality, and the universe is eternal, right? Eternal return. These ideas are present, for example, in Plato. Plato, I would argue, is a mystical, initiatory, theological philosophy. But predecessors to Plato amongst the pre-Socratics, who were usually consumed with questions of grand narrative. So with the pre-Socratics, Parmenides, right, with Heraclitus, Anaximander, all these different characters, they were concerned with figuring out what is the overriding ultimate force, power, or organizing principle that explains all reality. And so, for example, in Heraclitus, the idea is that all reality fundamentally just is flux. It is change. The only permanence is change. That would be a very Heraclitean dictum. So we'll look at this forerunner because, of course, when we get to people like Hegel, who will influence Marx, because early Marx joins the young Hegelians, we're going to see that dialectical process philosophy is the root, the presupposition, the starting point of the entire system.